Okie dokie, how are you doing? Today we move into the final chapter of the 4 language skills, how to teach writing. A lot of teachers look at teaching writing as the same as teaching grammar. But in this chapter, we are looking at how to teach composition writing, especially academic writing. In chapter 19, we'll focus on teaching grammar. So let's get into it. As always, in this chapter, I hope to help you increase your understanding of the theories of teaching writing, and also give you a few chances to think of some practical ideas about teaching writing in enjoyable and effective ways. By now, I imagine you are used to the structure of these videos. As always, I'll be trying to keep the video to around 10 minutes, so let's see how we go. I think the first discussion topic from the previous chapter worked well, so let's try it again. I'd like you to share some of your strategies for improving your writing skills. Again, I'm not talking about just writing 1 or 2 sentences accurately, but writing longer passages. Do you keep a diary in English? Do you have a blog that you write in English? Maybe you don't do anything. If you don't, why not? Be ready to share some ideas with your classmates. As you might imagine, there has been a lot of research done related to improving writing skills. There are 9 main points for us to have a look at, so let's begin. First, we need to remember that compositions are not just written versions of speeches. There are issues like permanence and distance, like we talked about in the last chapter. The process also includes several steps, for example, thinking, drafting, and revising. Because we know the process of writing is important, teachers are encouraged to look at this process, viewing it as a thinking process rather than just looking at the final product. Such planned processes result in more meaningful writing for students. It's interesting to note that some research, albeit not all particularly strong research, suggests that one's culture affects the way that we write and the structure of our compositions. The way you put your compositions together may reflect your cultural background. We also need to realize that because students are writing in their second language, L2, they will be faced with many more challenges than when writing in their first language. For example, amount of planning, grammatical accuracy, and level of vocabulary. Just like any aspect of teaching second or foreign languages, authenticity is a vital part of writing too. We see on page 431 that classroom writing can be divided into real writing, where the reader doesn't know the answer and generally wants to learn information from the writer, and display writing, where the reader does know the information being given by the writer. It's kind of like the referential questions and display questions that we talked about back in chapter 13. To increase authenticity, try to increase the amount of real writing you have your students do. In order to increase the amount of real writing, we need to make it part of our overall goals for the course. We can have students respond to different topics covered in the course in various genres, such as emails, reports, and even simple research papers. When we have students respond to various issues, teachers need to remember that they just need to be guiding students in the process of writing, not trying to impose their opinions on those of the students. There are many ways of approaching feedback, especially to errors, which will be covered in chapter 19. For now, remember to give enough feedback to challenge students, but not so much that they will be discouraged. And finally, and our second finally for this video, we want to encourage students to display their culture and identities through writing. This can be difficult for students, especially considering they are not writing in their L1. Wow, that was pretty long, yet there is still more to come. In the previous chapter, we looked at the characteristics of writing from the reader's perspective. Now, let's look at the issues from the writer's perspective. So because writing is permanent, it can be a little scary. Once it is completed in its final form, you can't change it. As teachers, we need to help students revise over and over again before the final submission. In comparison to speaking, though, students do have a lot more time to produce their compositions. So if they put in the time and effort, they can come up with some really high-quality pieces of writing. As writers, we need to create an image of who is going to read our work. But it is very difficult to imagine when and where our compositions will be read. Encourage students to read their compositions from various perspectives when revising. Orthography, that fancy word for spelling and punctuation, can pose many challenges for students, especially if they are not used to various rules that come with alphabetical systems. Because writing is expected to be much more complex than speaking, not just using simple sentences, students need to be aware of how to link sentences. This can be challenging even in one's L1. To help increase the quality of writing, having a good grasp of vocabulary and learning how to use a thesaurus will be vital. And finally, last, we have formality. The writer needs to be able to call upon various levels of formality in writing to meet the expectations of the reader. And again, we have the micro skills and macro skills to think about. As we can see on page 437, the micro skills concentrate on the finer details within the words and sentences. The macro skills, on the other hand, focus more on the underlying message that the writer is trying to pass on to the reader. Okay, discussion time. It was mentioned earlier that differences in writing styles and composition structures will occur depending on cultural background. What differences can you notice in the way English compositions are structured and compositions written in your native language are structured? Find some examples and share them with your group members in class. So what can we try to get our students doing with writing in the classroom? There are 5 main types of performances we can consider when teaching writing. Let's have a quick look. First, in imitative or mechanical writing, we can have students basically just recognize and copy passages. There is little freedom for the students, so this kind of performance might be best kept to beginners. To give your students a bit more of a challenge, you can use intensive or controlled writing. There isn't a lot of room for creativity from the writer, but these tasks can be good for checking and strengthening students' understanding of grammar. Our textbook mentions Dictogloss as a good way of improving writing skills. This is better known as Dictogloss, and we all know where to find great Dictogloss books, don't we? Self-writing is quite self-explanatory, referring to diaries and portfolios in which students record personal experiences. We talked about display writing before. Although it is not ideal because the reader usually knows the content, it is important to include such writing performances to check proficiency, especially for those students aiming for more academic levels. Through real writing, the students get opportunities to share new information about what they have researched or their own experiences. It is real writing that we would like students doing mostly in our classes if we want to get them writing high-quality compositions. Our textbook suggests 8 interesting principles to keep in mind when teaching listening. Like taking up any skill, whether it be language, sports, music, or whatever, looking at the habits of those who are highly proficient in that skill and imitating them is always going to be useful. Writing is no exception. We need to make sure both teachers and students don't just concentrate on the final composition. The process of getting to the final product is just as important. As teachers, we need to take our students' cultures into consideration. Remember, one's background may affect the structure of the composition he or she writes. Reading and writing are connected, So we should make reading part of our writing classes. Have students notice how compositions are structured when they are reading, then look to imitate those structures in their own writing. We've already discussed the importance of real writing, but even if we are using a bit of display writing, which is still okay, it needs to be authentic. Having students think about the audience and the purpose for their composition will also increase the authenticity of their writing. As we've already said, writing involves a process of thinking, drafting, revising, and rewriting. Students need to be given opportunities to take these steps in their writing. There is a good list of these steps on page 444. Learning from peers can be just as valuable as learning from the teacher. Give students opportunities to share their compositions with others, especially when revising their compositions. And finally, teachers need to be there for students as a facilitator, not as a person who's going to judge their opinions or anything else students will be putting into their compositions. And we finish up with assessment. As I have said in each of the language skills chapters, we will look more closely at assessment later in the textbook. For now, I suggest you remember various writing tasks, like we see on pages 458 and 459, and the importance of rubrics when it comes to assessing writing. There are some ideas for assessment criteria on page 457, but you also need to consider descriptions for each of those as well. When I say descriptions, I mean clearly explaining the difference between, for example, a score of 4 and a score of 5. Let's talk more about that in chapters 20 and 21. Our final discussion topic is still the same. I would like you to come up with an activity to use in the classroom that will help improve your students' writing skills. You can use some of the ideas in the textbook, but as always, aim to make your activity as original as possible. I'd also like you to carefully consider authenticity and the idea of real writing that we talked about earlier in this video. Well, that is it for this chapter. Well done us on getting through to the end. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in class.